Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. In this video, I'm going to look in more detail how the press uses fake news about heat waves as part of their ongoing war against low-cost, reliable energy. On July 19th, a lot of the Earth was very cold, including Alaska, Antarctica, and Siberia. The global temperature anomaly was 0.2 degrees above the 1979 to 2000 average. Moscow was quite cool, but the United Kingdom was very hot. High pressure over Moscow was circulating very hot air from the Sahara directly up into the United Kingdom. In this closer view, you can see the hot air across the narrowest section of the English Channel. Because of this, the hot air didn't cool very much as it crossed the channel, and England set record temperatures. The usual culprits in the press said the small area of the Earth was proof of global warming. London had two hot days on July 18th and July 19th. According to the World Meteorological Organization, a heat wave is 5 or more consecutive days of very hot weather. But London only had 2 or 3 days, so it wasn't a heat wave at all. But reality didn't stop the usual fake news culprits in the press. The BBC said UK's 40°C heatwave basically impossible without climate change. It wasn't a heatwave, but the BBC said leading scientists had concluded what they reported. Not to be outdone, the Washington Post engaged in their own hysterical reporting. London, has it ever in human history been this hot in the British Isles? Hitting 40°C for British climate scientists is a kind of unicorn event that had appeared in their models but until recently seemed almost unbelievable and unattainable this soon. Cairo, Karachi, Phoenix, they are world-beating furnaces, but London, the high-latitude city with its recorded history dating back to the Romans, had probably never before experienced temperatures such as those on Tuesday. Surely no Britons alive now or their ancestors had felt 40°C without traveling abroad. Queen Victoria, William Shakespeare, Henry VIII, they probably never faced down a 40°C day within the British Isles. Remember the reference to Henry VIII because I'm going to come back to that later. 2 or 3 days of hot weather is not a heat wave. But in 1976, London had an actual heat wave. Heathrow Airport had 16 consecutive days where they averaged over 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius. Nobody blamed the 1976 heat wave on global warming. In fact, it was quite the opposite. On January 29, 1974, the always reliable Guardian reported, "Space satellites show new ice age coming fast." Phoenix had their worst heat wave on record that same summer, with 18 consecutive days over 110 degrees. The largest tornado outbreak in U.S. history occurred on April 3rd and 4th of that same year, 1974. Also in 1974, Australia had their largest bushfires on record, with 15% of the country burning. And on Christmas Day 1974, Darwin, Australia was destroyed by Cyclone Tracy. Nobody in 1976 was foolish enough to blame London's record 16-day heat wave on global warming. And 2 years later, in 1978, the New York Times reported, "International team of specialists finds no end in sight to 30-year cooling trend." Another very bad heat wave occurred in London 19 years ago, when London had 8 consecutive very hot days and reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 38 degrees Celsius, a little bit cooler than this year's heat. London also reached 100 degrees or 38 degrees Celsius on August 9, 1911. That was an actual heat wave which caused more than 1,000 deaths in Germany, great heat in England, large numbers of deaths in Paris, heat and drought in America. This year there was a small hot area for 2 days, but in 1911 it was a very long-lasting heat wave which covered a much larger area. During the summer of 1911, Paris had a 70-day heat wave which killed more than 40,000 people. And on the other side of the Atlantic, New England had their worst heat wave also in July 1911. The heat wave lasted 11 days and killed thousands of people. Now let's go back to Henry VIII. Europe's worst heat wave and drought occurred in the year 1540 while Henry VIII was king. Temperatures from Spain to Italy up to London were significantly hotter than the 2003 heatwave. And the mega drought of 1540 in Europe lasted for 11 months. The heat wave of 1540 wasn't just occurring in Europe, it also occurred in North America. The Great Drought of 1540 made the Indian tribes of the Mississippi Valley call on De Soto the explorer to intercede with his god that they might not perish from starvation. Europe's hottest summer occurred in 1540, which according to the 1990 United Nations report was one of the coldest periods of the last 1,000 years. It's pretty clear that the BBC's leading scientists have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. This year's 2 days of hot weather wasn't a heat wave at all, and the hottest summer in Europe occurred in 1540 during the Little Ice Age. London was almost as hot in 1911, but the Washington Post said heat waves like that shouldn't happen there because they're a high-latitude city. But London isn't a high-latitude city, it's about the same latitude as Calgary. However, at actual high latitudes, hot weather during the summer is not unusual. 100 years ago this week, the New York Times reported that Alaska had been over 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle. Also, 100 years ago, Arctic Norway was experiencing misplaced tropical heat. Arctic Norway was having an actual heat wave 100 years ago, 6 weeks of temperatures ranging from 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Alaska also reported 100 degrees in 1934. The official temperature record for Alaska is 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle on June 27, 1915. 100 years ago, National Geographic explained this, when the Arctic gets more heat than the equator. They also reported 100 degrees north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska. NASA published this nice chart showing why it gets hot at high latitudes during June and July. During the summer, the North Pole receives more solar radiation than any place else on Earth. The Washington Post's fake news probably shouldn't have mentioned Henry VIII, and they also should have avoided their fake news about high latitudes. Now let's look at the most anomalous known extreme heating event, which occurred in 1859. On June 17, 1859, normally cool Santa Barbara, California warmed up from 77 degrees to 133 degrees Fahrenheit in just a few hours. And then 3 hours later, the temperature cooled back down to 77 degrees. A fisherman who was out at sea came back with his arms all blistered. Many calves, rabbits, and birds died of suffocation. The greatest losses are among the vegetables. The fruit trees are all burned. The pears and apples have been literally cooked. This unprecedented heating event was associated with the largest solar storm on record, the Carrington event. The coronal mass ejection during the summer of 1859 brought the auroras all the way to the equator and shut down electronic communications all over the Earth. Telegraph lines were non-functional. These sort of extreme heating events have nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuels, regardless of what fake news sources like the BBC and the Washington Post have to say. The United Kingdom is a very small place, but the United States and the world are much larger. The United States and world record temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit was set on July 10, 1913. The U.S. Weather Bureau reported a hot spell which has perhaps not been equaled anywhere else on the Earth's surface so far as reliable weather records are available is the following as recorded at Greenland Ranch. They had 3 days over 130 degrees Fahrenheit that week. The world record temperature was carefully recorded using high-quality equipment. July 1913 was an incredibly hot month in the United States, unlike anything modern Americans have experienced. 42 states were over 100 degrees. 8 states were over 110 degrees. 2 states were over 120 degrees, and California was over 130 degrees. Every single state was over 90 degrees. According to the official U.S. government National Climate Assessment, heat waves in the United States were much worse prior to 1960, with the worst years being during the 1930s. And on the other side of the Atlantic, Europe has a very long history of severe heat waves and droughts. Both the BBC and the Washington Post are fully engaged in a war on low-cost, reliable energy. And they use the same appeals to authority over and over again, citing people they call leading scientists. During the summer, there's always a lot of hot air in the Sahara Desert, and if the wind is blowing the right direction, the hot air is going to come to London. The BBC is making the case that if they ban fossil fuels and thus freeze millions of Britons to death, they can prevent heat waves in the future. This is not only insane, but it also has no scientific basis. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on these scamsters in the press, government, and academia for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki, and Upala on the web at realclimatescience.com.